It's 2 minutes past, so I will start. So good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the fourth CSP event as the Leeds Digital Festival. This is the third online presentation. Hopefully you've been able to join some of the earlier ones, and I'll talk more later on about the remaining two that are due. Firstly, by way of introduction, my name is Robert Briggs. I am a director at Cybersecurity Partners. We are a cybersecurity consultancy based in Leeds, hence sponsorship. So we've been there for 5 years now, and we've been growing very quickly from initial creation through to now. And this is something that we wanted to try and help the local community, the Leeds-based community, regarding cybersecurity as a whole. And the topic I've chosen today for risk management in the CI/CD pipeline. So it will may feel quite specialist. I'm trying to put or get the right balance between content and making the most of this time. So just so everybody's aware, we are recording these events and it will be put up live on our website along with all of the other videos throughout the course of this week. So if you want to catch up on this or any of the others, please go onto our website, csp.partners, and you'll find the information there. So just starting off, the risk management, risk assessments, understanding cybersecurity risks, it is quite key. But what I wanted to do is try and explain the difference that we were seeing with our customers and overall in how do we manage risks when things are constantly changing, things are going through. So just moving on to the next slide. So risk management. I'm going to make an assumption that everybody, what is it? Basically, every organization needs to understand the risks to its data or the data it processes and any of the cybersecurity of the infrastructure and network, and how those are managed is ultimately going to lead to how successful, how resilient, how available you are and your organization is there. So why do you do it? I mean, if we all perceive there to be zero cyber security risk or risk in particular, then we wouldn't actually do anything. But people are being attacked more. There are lots of incidents that happen. It's across the press all the time about information that's either leaked, disclosed, manipulated, servers not available, etc. And it can be quite frustrating for both the organization and also its customers, people who rely upon that information. The who, why, and when, that all depends on what approach we use. And this is the part of the thing that I want to actually bring out in this presentation. So the traditional process, one that I think most people will be aware of, is the sort of the 5 steps of how risk assessment and how risks are managed going on. So first and foremost, data classification, understanding your data, threat identification, what are the threats to you, your organization, the data in particular, and then we perform the risk assessment, understanding how those attacks and attack vectors might be used to actually compromise you and your organization. So the once that's done and the calculation or the assessment is made to understand the threats to your organization, you can start designing controls that are going to protect your data, your information. And then when that's all going in, anything that's outstanding then becomes a security risk that's either managed or controlled on an ongoing basis. So that is very high level risk assessment process. And that is, or quite often is, the method or the process that's used within what's called the waterfall method. So the traditional approach to implementing solutions or services that you want to go out. So the features of that model is great if you've got, because you get lots of time. The requirements are known very early doors, and they generally remain static with just perhaps 1 or 2 changes going on as the sort of issues are found, or issues sort of risks are understood, or there's a slight development in features. And there's also those long-term goals. You know exactly what you want implemented and by when. So that is good. However, Agile or CI/CD, continuous improvement, continuous development, there are things there that are different to a standard waterfall method. So we've got less time. Things happen quickly. Sprints generally happen with 2 weeks, or potentially, you might have multiple sprints for a short development cycle. The requirements change constantly. The churn of changes to the structure, what you're trying to deliver, even if it's piecemeal, but it's, because you are trying to achieve immediate returns, the requirements will change very, very quickly. And depending on the type of organization, you often find that there is a lot of churn in those. And then there's also, because of the 2 weeks, it's a very short-term focus. What can I do to get a return within 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, etc.? And as we've just explained there for Waterfall, all of those points challenge the waterfall method. So the traditional risk management process is not fit for purpose. It doesn't work. You would be spending, I think, the majority of your time trying to do that risk assessment in half a day, just to keep on top of it and to feed in. So something needs to change to allow that to happen properly. So what can you do to sort of do this? So some of those internal processes within the traditional ones still apply. So data classification drives all of your cybersecurity. What are you trying to protect? If you don't know that, then it's very difficult to do any sort of risk assessment. Identifying the threats, that also still applies. And then jumping right to the end, once risks are identified, they do still need to be managed in turn. So it is, so the start and the end of the process still apply, but it's all in the middle bit where the majority of the work will change. And then these checkpoints within the waterfall, there's very often sign-off stages where you'll review, sign off that stage is complete, therefore you can move on to the next stage. So whilst we don't exactly have those checkpoints in place, they are certainly things that we can use. They do still exist within agile or continuous development processes, and those checkpoints are going to become more and more important. And that's where I'll explain this on over the next couple of minutes. So what looks like a very complicated diagram, as you can see, we've still got the start and the end, the data classification through to risk management, they still apply. However, the circle in the middle is the bits that apply for the agile side of things. So what can you do? Yes, we still need to manage risk. We still need to identify what those risks are, but we've got to try and address them early doors. Try and ensure that either the risks don't appear, which is obviously the preference, or that anything that comes out of them is continuously fed into the next sprint, the next cycle of development. So I've got 3 items there that I just really want to focus on. So from a security requirements perspective, there will be certain security requirements that your organization wants to always have. So a perfect example would be access control. Any individual should only have access to the information that they need. Now, that's great. So within the sprint, the CI/CD pipeline, that overarching security requirement, or any of overarching security requirements, whether it's been always use HTTPS or use certificates, etc., should be fed in and should apply to every single feature that's applied that you're trying to develop to. And whilst some organizations might request specific user stories, if we go into agile terminology, they should, or they all should apply and in effect be used as the base for any development that works upon that. And by setting those early on and presenting that information to developers, they should be focused on always ensuring that those security requirements are set, those base foundings, and then any specific security requirements for that sprint should then be documented as a separate user story. So once they're in place, then we've given that information to the developers, to the people who are managing that process for consistent engagement and management of security. So we've moving on. So we've told the developers, this is what you've got to do. one of the main features of sprint and sort of agile methodologies that we try to remove as many obstacles as we can, or any dependencies, so that the development can work at pace, at speed. Therefore, if we are going to do that, then we need to assign responsibilities to those developers so that they are continuously testing and ensuring that they're meeting all of the requirements. So whether that's meeting a user story that is specifically or explicitly explained for that sprint, or whether it's the generic security responsibilities or security requirements. And it's once the responsibilities are assigned to those developers, then we are in effect delegating responsibility onto them. That is great. That's the way that I would love every organization to work, because obviously if you develop securely from the start, we don't have to try and retrofit anything. But they also need some tools and some ways of working so that they understand what to do. So the developers, what we're trying to do with that delegation, we're removing dependencies because they are now responsible for it themselves. And part of those responsibilities would be the security testing. So a couple of ways that could do that. We might be looking to run specific tests from a security perspective, from an external point of view, or more than likely, we should be looking at the developers checking the code that they've written, all of the processes that they've laid out and sort of spent their time doing that one, ensuring that the code doesn't contain any vulnerabilities, uses the latest libraries for development purposes, etc., so that we're not building with those vulnerabilities in. So we've got, code checking tools, SAST type methodologies where we can ask the developers to run those tests or that check, so that they tick that checklist to say, I have done this securely and I've incorporated all of the latest security controls or the security code checks. And then from a sprint perspective, that goes all around. So the box I've got there at the bottom is the compliance, because we are delegating those responsibilities to the developers, to the Scrum Master, to the individuals on the team, to prevent us actually getting in the way of their sprint and impacting their timeframes. We just want to ensure that we've got a checklist in place so that we can monitor compliance on an ongoing basis. That will allow us to pick up very quickly if there are any issues relating to the code, or the fact that they're trying to rush things through. But then it's in effect, we, from a security point of view, would do something and sort of monitor it externally to the team. So that ongoing cycle, the little loop I've got there in the middle, that we're monitoring the delegation and how they're doing it. And from that, we can work out if there are any other security risks that come out of it that need to be managed, or if there's anything else that we need to do. So it's very much focused on high-level security requirements, delegating of responsibilities, and doing constant code checking to ensure that the controls are in place. So from a security perspective, what can we do? It sounds silly, but on the traditional, there would be a project manager, and it would be engaging with them to ensure that they had security. Now, the Scrum Master's role is slightly different than a project manager, because they're responsible for removing all dependencies and stop any distractions coming in, so that the team, the Scrum, are focused on their task. For me, I have, through experience, found that if you make friends with, a very simplistic level, with the Scrum Master, and you're explaining the process and what they need to do, you're no longer seen as a distraction, and it's seen as a core deliverable or activity, is the way that they're doing. Embedding it into that process means that you are aware of anything that's going to change, anything that's happening, and you will have access to them to be able to delegate or continue to delegate the activities that you need doing. Be involved at the beginning. It's a security ideal, this one. When the sprints are created, it outlines the activities and the features that they should be doing. By being involved, what we're showing is, and this could be done in the daily stand-ups that the Scrum teams do, but what we are asking them is we're ensuring that either the user stories that they are creating the features to, we can either we can edit them or we can review them to ensure that the correct requirements are fed into those user stories. And an example of a user story there that I do is try and spin it on the positive side as well. So developers don't like statements along the lines of don't lose my data, or don't let the privacy of this data be compromised, etc. That doesn't generally work. It's not the mindset of the developers on the whole. Obviously, broad sweeping statement. It's more of a enable. I would write something along the lines of enable access controls to limit access to the data to the authorized people. As a product owner, I would like to run reports to see who has access to the data at this time. These features or user stories allow the developers to move on. And this is something, again, it's very much at the beginning, and it's to set the Scrum team off in the right direction, because trying to reel them back in is very, very difficult. And that's where that last point comes in, the monitor the security debt. So from a security debt perspective, people know that, others as technical debt. If we are have the understanding that there is going to be a security control implemented, if there is an issue with it, if there's a technical issue or a timing issue, something that can't be done, that security debt that's created, that is an immediate flag for a security risk. And it's the identification of that debt, turning it into a risk, so that not only the Scrum team, but also the business owners understand what they're doing. As an example, if for encryption in transit, HTTPS connections could not be done because we couldn't get a certificate in time, then we're automatically then running the risk that data presented on the web may be accessible and could be intercepted. So that's very much a risk that at that point in time we want to raise, we want to ensure that the business owner is aware of. That the idea obviously is to have zero security debt, in the same way that we've got lots of technical debt, but removing it or ensuring that security debt is on the low side will enable the risk to be kept to a minimum and to understand where they're going. So the process that I was talking about, the triangle in the middle, once we've got those security requirements, we've got the assigned responsibilities and the security testing, what can be done? Let's focus a bit more onto the DevSecOps side of things. So I think I mentioned it at the top, but the enabling or the writing of the user stories or checking the overarching security requirements, what we're doing is we're building in very early the security checks into that process. So given that the checks are there, it means that security should be developed throughout. We're automatically reducing risk before it happens. And if there are lots of statements that need to be factored in, then at least all of the teams are aware of it, and that we are showing to the business that we understand the risks, we're trying to mitigate them, and we are putting those into that CI/CD pipeline, into that process. What this doesn't mean, though, is that there's a change to the Agile approach. This the delegation means we're removing any dependencies that they have on external teams, because that's what causes the delay, trying to get meetings, etc. But by giving the responsibility still within the DevSecOps type of things, we're not asking them to change anything. We're not becoming a hindrance. We are literally saying this is part of the process that you need to do. From an experienced developer point of view, they should already be aware of what's in place. I mean, I have had examples where developers will actually focus on the functionality, but embedding or feeding in security requirements into it doesn't mean they change. It just means that they've got the other or an additional user story to consider. And then there's a security test. So once all that development has happened, say 2/3, 3/4 of the way through the actual sprint, we can then put technical controls or facilitate access to technical controls so that the code is checked constantly. That ongoing QA, in effect, from a security perspective, allows the code to be reviewed before it goes on, and that's got a couple of benefits, such as it removes or lessens the requirement to go externally. It means that we can get some sort of assurance that the libraries being used are up to date, that we're not becoming out of date, because obviously open source tools, etc., they change regularly. So putting that test in, I've got a list on the next slide of lots of examples as to the tools that are available, but by putting those in means that they can run it, the testers can run it as the developers can run those technical scripts that will automatically check, flag up any issues, and then they've got time there and then to fix it, or if there's more complicated things, then we can identify it into risks. So tools that these are common tools, example tools. There are lots out there. It's simple enough to either do searches online to find out if there are any tools. Some have got more focus than others. So, for example, on this list, White Source very much focuses on the open source elements. So, again, that just runs a script against the code that's been written to ensure that the latest vulnerabilities are addressed. And that, Aqua, SonarQube, they all do pretty much. Oh, sorry, I'm going the wrong way. So they all do separate. Relatively the same type of control, where they can do a static review of the code. They can do online, identify those vulnerabilities, and they just flag it up to you internally to try and sort. And they're all well, I suppose I'm working in Sphere. They're all well known. There's nothing difficult about the operation of these. Very simple to run, to implement, and then to manage on an ongoing basis. The other one up there is the Acunetics. That focuses very much on the web side of things. So if you're developing new web front end or new web services, that focuses on the website and everything about it. But they're all good. We do not have a preference from CSP point of view. We all think they're very good, and the right one will be different for every organization depending on the skills and the knowledge and what you actually need to do, but very much worth having a look at it. So in summary, in line with Agile, assign responsibilities to the developers, the Scrum Master, and monitor compliance. That way we're showing we're working with the Agile methodology and we're not trying to trip them up or find something. Prevent that security debt. It's a challenge. I think there's too many examples where programs have gone live without security and I think they can retrofit it. It's always more expensive. I've never known anything that could easily just be slotted in the top. It's very much a go back, re-engineer some aspects, do some retest it, refunction it, but by using sort of on an ongoing basis that prevention, those controls, that testing, you're reducing costs, you're making development more efficient, and we're keeping on top of it from a risk assessment point of view. The more prevention, the better. And then lastly, the reason why we make friends with the Scrum Master, keep up to date with the changes and the requirements churn. Yes, we think we know where sprints are going and what they're doing, but there are always changes that come out, new features, new functionality that's desired. Somebody has an idea that they want to factor in. Keep up to date with those requirements, because the earlier that we know about the changes, the earlier we can identify that risk. Getting that risk sort of identified earlier just allows you to address it, either include it into a later one as security debt, or actually address it within that sprint itself. So on the whole, that was a whistle-top tour of the of the risk assessment in CI/CD. Yes, the process has got to move with the times, move with the way that the industry is going, but by implementing those compliance checks and giving that responsibility should hopefully free your time up as a security professional to either look at the threats and manage the threats and then manage the risk on an ongoing basis. So I am on to Q&A. I just want to open up the floor, see if there are any questions from the audience that have attended. And yeah, hopefully I can share some knowledge and insight.
Yeah, so Robert, I have got 2 questions that come through to me. So I'll just read you out these. I've got, so can you expand on the pen testing, security testing aspects, and what would you consider appropriate?
Okay. Yes, so I mentioned it briefly there about the security testing point of view, where we would get the developers to do it. So pen testing is something that we're all aware of, or it's in the test a lot, preferably, more often than not, organizations may want to do an external pen test on their solution. The risk management in a CI/CD pipeline doesn't remove that requirement, but what it does do is give you additional assurance that the testing that you've done to date within your internal processes is actually keeping things secure. So as opposed to checking every single development that you've done from an external pen test perspective, it does allow you to reduce that test. So that internal test that you do gives you some assurance, which means you might not need to test every single development on an ongoing basis because you've got trust that all vulnerabilities are identified. So I would see on a normal program, you might want to do significant amount of pen testing if it's a key system for you. You might want to do some initial testing just to give you confidence that your internal processes work, but then that can slowly tailor down to show that things are being identified. So every program's different, every project's different. However, I would suspect external pen testing just becomes a little comfort blanket rather than a mandatory test, rather than a duvet, if you like.
Okay, thank you, Robert. So Ben has just asked me a question. So what characterizes the stages of maturity for security in a CI/CD pipeline, and have you observed any false sense of confidence in approach?
Okay, so the maturity model, if controls are applied in the life cycle that I was going through that methodology, where we've got the requirements, we've got the developer's responsibility, and we've got the development one, that automatically takes you up a level in the maturity level if you're looking at, for example, CMMI. And the reason for that is we are meeting some of the overarching security responsibilities, which are to give people responsibility. Everybody's responsible for security, but we're now giving them a task and a checklist or whatever to show that they are meeting these requirements. So that ongoing management of delivery of the security aspects automatically brings you up the maturity model. From anything that I've seen regarding the maturity, it's ignoring the instances where people have just implemented this for the first time and automatically think they've addressed it and they're all happy straight away. It suddenly becomes when new, for example, features are implemented into a solution. So if you've got you've gone live at, let's say, a beta stage program and it is working, if the next sprint suddenly adds in lots of functionality of, for example, a different component, or it's expanded or automates some of the process, then yes, you might want to do additional testing. I can't give out too many examples. In fact, I can't really give out any given the work that we're in, but yes, I have seen it where the addition of new functionality has suddenly resulted in vulnerabilities going through. They were found by an external pen test, this particular one, that's what I can say. And then we actually went back in and helped try and revise the process that they were using to sort of strengthen that security testing. So it was a little bit of a, they were using the tool, one of the tools, I think it was SonarQube, if I remember correctly, but they hadn't activated all of the checks and something sneaked through. So we went back in and sort of helped identify what they were doing, just to bring them up on, to make it more complete, and in effect allow them to get the trust back that they were identifying the vulnerabilities before it went live. I hope that's your question, Ben.
Okay, thank you. So I've just got one last one. So when I read this out, if anyone else has got any last minute questions, please do send them through. So have you used any of the tools given as examples? Which are the best?
Okay, so we have we've used a couple of those. I'll literally just quickly go back up. So on projects, etc. I have used Aqua, SonarQube, GitLab. Personally, I've not used White Source, but I've seen it used. They all do very, very similar things. They've all got very good reputations, and it does, we from CSP point of view don't recommend a particular one. We don't want to, we would rather be product agnostic, and it's the same for all sorts of things, not just code scanning and code checking tools. And it but there are benefits for each and every one of them. Some are more complete, if that makes sense. They cover everything, but they might not be as specialized as certain other elements. So I gave the example before about White Source being the open source checker. That's its forte. That's what it stands for. However, the GitLab, for example, covers a lot of things. So there are certainly benefits and advantages for all of them, and they've all got a place, I think, is probably the most politically correct way of answering it. Just to say product agnostic, but yeah, they all have very good reputations.
Okay, so I think that's it for the questions. I've not got any more come through. So,
okay, well, I'll just sort of wrap up then. So hopefully that was useful. Anybody can contact us if you've got any more questions about this, or if there's any advice, guidance, etc. that you would like in that area. As a blatant plug, we've got 2 more events now as part of Leeds Digital Festival. There's one on Wednesday at 1 o'clock, which is about responding to security questions as part of tenders, if you're bidding for some work, and the compliance, etc., and how to answer those questions and show that you take security seriously, and your potential customers will then see what you're doing and how you're doing it. So I recommend that. Kevin, that's one of the directors, doing that Wednesday at 1. And then we've got our fun evening on Thursday at 5:30 in Avenue HQ, where we're doing a fun event called Life's a Breach. It's going to be lots of fun. We've had some fun times coming up with the idea, and hopefully you'll find it useful. But yeah, they're on Eventbrite and under the Leeds Digital Festival. If you search that, or CSP, you'll find all the details on there. So shameless plug there for some of our future events. But if there's no more questions, then I will leave you to enjoy the rest of the afternoon, and I hope you found that very useful. So thank you.
Okay, thank you, everyone.
Thank you.